These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs. We are proud to stand with you.
The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal Television for Agricultural Business Decisions is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today on Market Journal. I'm Bryce Duskett. It has been a busy week in the world of agriculture news, and we're here today to bring you up to date with all the latest developments. We've got some important news to cover. There's been a recent outbreak of highly pathogenic avian influenza in several dairy farms across the United States. Our state veterinarian from Nebraska will be stopping by to fill us in with the latest details. Also, we'll be talking about how crucial vitamin A is when it comes to newborn calves. And of course, let's not forget about the March blizzard that hit many of us hard over the past week. We'll be joined by meteorologist Eric Hunt here coming up in a few moments to give us the latest on the weather. That's a look at what's ahead here on Market Journal, but let's begin here. The Nebraska Soybean Board and Nebraska Corn Board have joined hands to promote Stand Up for Grain Bin Safety Week. Their mission is to spread awareness among farmers and agricultural workers about the crucial importance of safety around grain bins. Let's not forget the bigger picture. General farm safety matters too. Today, let's highlight those efforts of two University of Nebraska graduates who are making waves in this area. They've discovered something and built something they call the grain Weevil, designed to keep the farmer out of the grain bin. Our own Mike Straub has the full scoop.
Grain bins may look safe from the outside, but if you've ever had to climb inside one, you know that they can pose a dangerous risk. In 2019, the Daily Yonder reported that grain entrapments rose 27%, with deaths rising by 53% the same year. Realizing that lives are at risk, two young Nebraskans formed a partnership which will help keep people out of grain bins altogether.
So actually we were approached by our farmer friend who saw us, kind of tinkering around with robots and asked us one day, he said, I never want to climb into a grain bin again, and I have some kids that I know that one day might have to climb into a grain bin. I never want them to have to go through that. So I want you guys to build me a robot so that no one ever has to go through that process ever again.
The Grain Weevil robot is a grain bin safety and management robot. It scurries across the top of the grain using auger-based propulsion, and this allows us to manipulate the grain so we can break up clumps and bridges, level the bin, and help with the efficient extraction of the grain when you're taking it out.
The two recent engineering graduates designed the robot to be small and streamlined, ensuring it can move freely within the grain bins.
Our small 18-inch by 20-inch robot allows us to be mobile inside of the bin. Unlike other solutions, which are big, heavy, attached to every bin, expensive products, we're able to move from bin to bin. We're able to do more complex tasks, like breaking up specific clumps or fixing small areas inside of a bin.
So we started kind of with a lot of off-the-shelf devices. So we hit the ground running with that, and then slowly I've been transitioning over to our own proprietary software. So it's been about a year-long process to get that all shifted over.
So right now we're able to do temperature as well as ambient humidity. We're working towards some more grain quality measurements, but those are more complex, and so we'll be working through those this summer.
So right now we have a remote control that we just drive manually, but in the future we hope to have it be completely autonomous. The farmer only has to drop the robot into the bin and then just walk away and let it run.
Other future changes include more data sampling options as well as cameras, so farmers can keep an eye on what's happening inside the bin. Both Zane and Ben are optimistic about the Grain Weevil's future, as they can see technological changes happening within the industry.
We're pushing as fast as we can. We're really passionate to get this thing out there as quickly as possible to help the farmers.
So in the future, hopefully in the next 10 years, we see every farm as having some sort of grain bin management system on it, and we hope to be that system. So we hope that the grain weevil is on grain bins all across the United States and hopefully eventually internationally.
I think that grain bins and farming in general is becoming more tech advanced, and I think there's going to be a big push on the safety as well as the management side, because we can improve the storage process that we currently have. And I think that there's going to be tools that will help and aid the farmer in that process. And I think that we have something that can definitely help that process. And what we always say is farmers know a lot about what's going on inside of their bin. They have sensors, they have the ability to learn, I have a hot spot, I have something going on, but now we're creating something that can safely do something about those problems.
All right, thank you very much for that story, Mike. Now, according to the latest data from USDA, Nebraska farms held just shy of 900 million bushels of corn in 2023. That's a whopping 31% increase from 2022. But with this surge in on-farm storage, that comes heightened risk of grain handling accidents. You can visit grainsafety.org for additional safety advice. A mysterious disease has been working its way through the Texas Panhandle over the past month or so, puzzling the agriculture industry. But to start the week, that mysterious disease was identified as a strain of highly pathogenic avian influenza, or HPAI. At the time of this broadcast, 3 dairies in Texas and 1 in Kansas have been tested now positive for HPAI. For a look at this developing story, we were joined in the studio by the Nebraska State Veterinarian, that is Dr. Dudley, on Thursday morning. Obviously, there's a lot of unknowns in this situation, but what can you share with us right now? What do we know about high-path avian influenza when it comes to dairy cattle?
You know, one of the things that I guess has been interesting to follow, going back, it seems like this situation kind of started back the first part of February with some cows that were having, kind of depressed cows, especially the older cows that were in mid-lactation. And those are really the only cows that seem to be affected. And but they started noticing that they were going off feed, decreasing milk production, and herd-wise maybe decreasing milk production by 6 to 8, 10% decrease in milk production. And anyway, so that started back then. Industry was trying to figure out what was going on. About 3 weeks ago, Texas Animal Health Commission started getting involved because this is happening in the Texas Panhandle area, is where it started. And they were, trying to figure out what was going on. About 2 weeks ago, USDA got involved and was started working. And one thing that was noted is that they were seeing some dead birds on the farms. They were seeing some sick cats and dead cats because we've known they are susceptible to this virus. And so a test was done, and the preliminary results came back last weekend basically, and that yes, they were able to identify the same virus that is circulating in wild birds in the dairy cows, specifically in the milk of the affected cows, not the overall milk, and the milk that is produced and that from the affected cows has a very different consistency. It's much thicker and so forth, and so that milk is diverted from human consumption anyway. So, yeah.
Well, I am obviously not a scientist, and it starts to show my lack of understanding of some of these issues. You talk about cats, how it's known that they are susceptible. Just from the name, though, highly pathogenic avian influenza. To me, I wouldn't have thought dairy cattle could be susceptible. On the science side of this, and as a veterinarian, is that something that you might have known in the industry that it is a possibility?
So certainly, over the last 2 years, we've been dealing with this H5N1 highly pathogenic avian influenza. And the highly pathogenic avian influenza is called that because of what it does in poultry. In poultry, it is very deadly, and so the highly pathogenic means that there's lots of symptoms, they die rapidly, those types of things. It's an influenza virus, and most animals get influenza viruses, and so this virus, over the last 2 years, we've seen it in many mammals around the world have died from this virus. Most of those animals that have died, though, have been what we call kind of the predators. They're out, they're scavenging and finding dead birds or sick birds, eating those, and those are the ones that we think seem to be more likely to get sick from avian influenza. So this is a little bit of a transition. The cattle situation, we didn't really expect that because they are not predators. They're not eating birds. That exposure is coming some other way. So there's a little bit of a surprise there, but we know this virus has been in lots of different animals.
Okay, I'm sure like on the poultry side of this, biosecurity is one of the things you want to mention.
Yeah, biosecurity is important no matter what. Biosecurity is important for everyday prevention of everyday diseases, but it's also important when we start talking about unusual diseases. The thing that's a little different with this is because dairy cattle and cattle in general and most mammals we think are what we call dead-end hosts. They can get sick with the virus, but they're unlikely to spread the virus to other mammals or back to poultry. So biosecurity is important, but some of that biosecurity is more talking about bird control around, especially around the dairy farms and that type of thing. We all know controlling birds is a real challenge, but we also know that's how a lot of our poultry facilities have been infected is because of wild birds. So everything you can do to cover feed, cover water sources, preventing birds from coming around is important.
A sincere thank you to Dr. Dudley for fitting into his busy schedule this week. We'll post the latest developments on this front at ruralradionetwork.com. Well, that news of HPAI and the dairy cattle was just one of the many factors impacting the livestock markets over the past week. To understand the full picture when it comes to the cattle complex as well as the grain markets, we were joined on Wednesday afternoon by livestock analyst Kyle Bumsted. Let's talk about the livestock market because it's been a pretty quiet week, I say very sarcastically. A lot of moving pieces to the complex right now for cattle.
That's right, there are, Bryce. And we had this cattle on feed report last week. Of course, the placements came in higher than trade anticipated, but cattle on feed reports, it's old data anyway. It's 3 weeks old when it comes out. It came out last Friday, and when Monday morning they hit the gas on the way down, we gapped lower, and we didn't look back. And we made new 4-week lows yesterday in this live cattle contract, made new 4-week lows here in the feeder cattle contracts as well, which is kind of saying to me that this rally could be over. Now, last week's cash was trading a lot of 192 to 193, and typically the third week of March, you put in a cash high here as far as the spring high as far as cash cattle go. And I always use Easter as a guide. Typically have your cash fat sold by Easter, and that's kind of the way it kind of falls in there. And that's what it's showing us here again. Now, Tuesday's action here, we saw some big volume and big open interest changes. Open interest washed out almost 8,500 contracts in the live cattle and over 600 contracts in the feeder. Live cattle traded over 136,000 contracts, and feeder cattle traded over 26,000 contracts. So that tells me that these non-commercial funds, they said, we want to take some money before the end of the month, and we want to just bank some profit here. So that looks to me like it could get a little bit dangerous if we start to violate some more downside technical levels here, as far as like taking out that 100-day moving average here as far as June live cattle. And if this thing does start to weaken on the cash side of things here a little bit more, then we could start to see that the hedgers here really come into play here, the basis traders. If that board's going to keep falling down and cash is going to come down slowly, then yeah, the basis traders are really going to be at this market.
Okay, Kyle, obviously lots to dive in there, what you're saying, but also want to bring up something that was confirmed on Monday by USDA, highly pathogenic avian influenza. Of course, we've talked a lot about that over the past couple of years when it comes to poultry, but a dairy in Texas, we've got a couple other confirmed cases now across the United States, dairy cattle impacted by HPAI. Is that weighing on the cattle sector as well?
I think it's more of a psychological thing. They keep saying that none of that beef is going to make it into the food chain per se if it's contaminated. So I don't know. There might be some herd liquidation due to it. I don't know what there's going to be. I think that there's been I know that Class 3 milk has had a big run here early this week. It shot up, but I'm concerned about consumer sentiment on that as well. As if it's not supposed to be able to get into the food chain. That's what they all say, but the consumer psychology could hurt the market a little bit more. So that's what I'm really worried about here, Bryce.
Going back to your big picture thoughts here on the cattle complex, sounds like you are saying that these high prices, this run we've been on since December, so I guess January timeframe, might be coming to an end, at least for now. Am I summarizing your thoughts are okay there, Kyle?
Yeah, that does kind of summarize the thoughts here. I do feel that this cattle complex got way overpriced here, and it is due for a pullback. We've pulled back $10 since last week's high so far at the middle of the week here, and we could definitely see some more downside to go here, especially here at the end of the quarter. We're seeing, like I said earlier, the funds are taking some money off the table here at the end of the quarter, banking some profits, and we still have plenty of cattle around here in front of us, and the weight issue that we have in front of us as well too. We are still putting weight on these cattle out here. Yes, there is a storm that just went through, but in general, we are still putting a lot of weight on these cattle here. I think weights are about 2% over last year. Even though our numbers are supposed to be down as far as head count, we could still be putting some tonnage on this market. And we need to watch consumer demand here. What happens after Easter? Do we start to get into grilling season? Watch that and see how the demand takes us there.
Okay, let me ask the flip side of that. Those are the reasons why the market could be going lower from this point forward. What are some of the reasons why it could maintain where it's at or perhaps even climb higher?
That's a good question. Short term, we are oversold here on the daily chart, so we are getting into some oversold levels here real quick. We dropped down there really fast here the last couple, 3 sessions, so we could start to, try to find some bottom pickers down in here. I'd be very cautious of that. Now, volatility is at 3-month highs here in both feeders and live cattle, and that says to me that the option sellers out there, they're wanting to get paid for taking on that risk. So I'd be watching what the volatility does. If the volatility starts to leak out and go down, then this market's probably has probably run its course here to the downside short term until we get some sort of headline again, whether that's a plant fire like we saw last week in Kansas, or if it's another headline dealing with HPAI or something like that. Those are black swan events that we can't control, but you have the power to do something.
All right. Real quick, I want to get your thoughts on the grain complex. You and I were recording before the planting intention is going to come out. Kind of a guess from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, what producers are going to do over the next year. Where do you see the corn and soybean markets in particular, though, Kyle, here, late March 2024? It's
a very good question. A lot of folks are saying that, there's not going to be much change. A lot of saying a lot more corn acres, a lot less bean acres. But I'm going to say there's going to be more bean acres than there will be corn, because that ratio of beans to corn is traded at 2.5 to 2.6. all winter long, which favors more soybeans. When you get to really putting the pencil to it, there's areas in the corn belt here on the fringe areas as well too that people lose less money planting beans than they do planting corn. So I think there's going to be a few less corn acres. However, talking to guys here in the central U.S. here in the plains and in the corn belt, with the weather that we've had earlier before this storm moved through, there was a lot of anhydrous got put on, a little more anhydrous got put on than anticipated. And in some of those areas where the insurance dictates it, they can still grow corn, they can still grow a lot of corn. So I'm still watching the drought monitor as well. It's very, very early to be calling a drought. We do have some issues out there. We haven't gotten this thing completely taken care of. Eastern Nebraska is still very dry, and there's parts of far eastern Iowa that are still very dry. So we do need to keep our eyes on that as far as weather. And I think once we get through this Easter holiday weekend, we get this report behind us here, we're going to start to focus on weather a little bit more. Those federal crop insurance planting dates are going to be right around the corner for a lot of folks. Now, of course, nobody starts before the federal crop date, but definitely watching that weather there for sure as we get into the early starts of planting season.
Good stuff as always there with Kyle. Now, coming up next week, we will be joined by Lee Scholes from Iowa State to discuss the latest when it comes to the pork industry. As always, we invite your questions here on the show, so if you have one for me to ask Lee, go ahead and email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. And today's agriculture landscape, nutrient management holds a key to both profitability and sustainability in crop production. But let's talk about potassium, one of those tricky nutrients to handle. Understanding potassium management is crucial. Even if your soil level seems sufficient, soil conditions can be a game changer on whether your crops can utilize this nutrient. Want to learn more? Dive into the March issue of the Nebraska Farmer for valuable insights. And now let's turn our attention over to weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and our very own Market Journal Chief Meteorologist, Eric Hunt. Eric, it seems like we're having a tough time shaking off the winter and embracing the spring weather conditions. When can we anticipate the temperatures to finally align with how we're feeling?
Well, thanks, Bryce. It may be a question of where, not when. That being, if you want to go down to Topeka or Tulsa, it's going to be in the 70s and 80s this weekend. We'll be on the north side of stalled out front, which will be giving us a focal point for some precipitation starting Saturday night and Sunday morning across portions of the Panhandle and north central Nebraska. We could actually see an inch of precipitation, including maybe 4 to 5 inches of snow across portions of northwestern Nebraska. As we head into later in the day on Sunday into Monday, we will see an area of low pressure develop in eastern Colorado, move slowly toward the east. That should extend precipitation across the state during the day on Monday into Monday night. The GFS is a little slower and stronger with their solution than the European model, and they actually are showing heavier precipitation across eastern Nebraska and some heavier snowfall amounts across central Nebraska. Again, I don't think this is probably the correct solution, but it is a possibility to pay attention to. As we head into later portion next week, we will see temperatures moderate back into more above normal temperatures in the 60s. But as we head into next weekend, we're going to see another cold front moving in the state that should bring a chance of precipitation and some cooler temperatures. The outlook for precipitation as we head into the second week of April, CPC is relatively bullish again on above average precipitation across a good portion of the central U.S. They are currently showing temperatures being mild as we head into the second week of April. Cooler in the west. I think what we have to pay attention to is how strong and how deep this troughing is and how far east it moves in the second week of April. I think there is a chance that this could be a little bit further toward the east, a little bit deeper than what is currently being projected by the models. If that's the case, this outlook is probably a bit too optimistic on the warmth across our region. Precipitation in the last 7 days, we did do very well across portions of south central, central, and northeastern Nebraska with widespread 1.5 to 2 inch values. And a good portion of the state did pick up over 1 inch of moisture in the last week, which is very welcome news for a lot of places that hadn't had any in about 4 to 6 weeks. We did also see quite a bit of snowfall across portions of north central and central Nebraska, with the big winter seems to be right around Vernon with about 15.5 inches of snow there in northwestern Custer County. The good news, though, with the moisture is we did see some eradication of drought and abnormal dryness across portions of the state. We now actually are down to less than 20% of drought in the state for the first time since July of 2021. That's very good news. Where we did see the improvement was mostly northeastern and central Nebraska, and a little pocket of improvement down here in Richardson County and also over in the Omaha area. Again, a lot of the reason we saw this improvement was the precipitation and some nice improvements in soil moisture. So these are 1 week changes in the percentiles of soil moisture. So again, places that really had not had a lot of moisture, which is northeastern Nebraska and getting into western Iowa, we did see some very nice improvements in the top soil moisture. But again, we still need continued moisture across this portion of the state as we head into the spring to really alleviate some of those long-term drought and hydrologic conditions. These are current soil moisture percentiles, generally kind of the near normal range for most of the state. And our soil temperatures currently are in the mid-30s to upper 30s. Again, this is probably the coldest they have been since the second or third week of February. So, just pay attention to those as we head closer to planting time. And the North Platte headwaters, again, snow water equivalents are right about the long-term median, so that's good news as we head into spring as well. Thanks, and back to you, Bryce.
All right, thank you very much for the update, Eric. You talk about warm temperatures, cattle producers, and those in the midst of calving season would sure appreciate having some of those over the next week. Talking about calving season, let's talk about vitamin A and its importance. As our newborn calves enter the world, it's crucial to keep a close watch on their vitamin A levels. After all, this nutrient plays a pretty pivotal role in building a strong immune system for young calves. Market Journal's Bill Dodd is here with this story. Bill?
Newborn calves are at a great risk of vitamin A deficiency, in large part because they're basically born without any. Newborn calves are highly dependent on the colostrum from their mother's milk to help fortify that particular nutrient. This will be a very important part of their early development until that calf can consume other varieties of feed.
And so that's kind of the main challenge in our spring calving systems is we're often calving before those cows would be on a diet that would be very high in vitamin A, because fresh green grass, it's a really great source of vitamin A, but hay and brown forages like dormant range or corn residue is actually quite low in vitamin A, so she doesn't have as much vitamin A in her diet, so she can't put as much in the colostrum.
When trying to fortify the colostrum of a mother cow for newborn calves, using feeds and supplements will be an inevitable step. However, this will need to be done at a specific time before calving ever takes place.
If we think about fortifying the cow to make sure the calf gets enough vitamin A in the colostrum, then we really need to think about making sure her diet has enough vitamin A in it during late gestation. So the last 3 months before pregnancy, they actually start forming colostrum, during those last 2 months. And so we typically say, okay, the time to really start focusing on vitamin A is really in those last few months before she's going to calve. And so we suggest that's where you really need to make sure that you are supplementing the cow, especially if she's on forages that are not fresh and green. So, if I have a fall calving cow, it's a whole different story because she's going to be grazing fresh green forages at that time. But in our spring calving cows, a lot of them would be either still on stalks or coming off of stalks during that time, or they might be being fed hay. And while green hay does have some vitamin A precursors in it, it probably only is about 50% of the requirement. So we suggest that even with green hay, you need to be supplementing vitamin A.
One of the most common supplementation programs would be the use of free choice mineral. And the biggest thing to keep in mind with this type of supplementation is the fact that you will need to provide a very concentrated amount.
So we typically suggest that if they're on green hay, that we need to supply about 50% of the requirement, which is usually somewhere around in this late gestation for the calf, right? It's not for the cow's requirement. In fact, her requirements are actually fairly low. So she can get by and actually bore a live calf with very little vitamin A. The problem is that the calf will not have epithelial integrity that it needs, and so they'll usually get diarrhea or respiratory disease. And it's usually very early, like the first 2 weeks of life. That's a common symptom of vitamin A deficiency. So what we suggest is in that free choice mineral, we want to provide, if she's on green hay, we want to provide about 50,000 international units per day, which in a 4-ounce mineral, which is a kind of a typical mineral intake, you got to multiply that by 4. So 200,000 international units per pound would be what you'd be looking for on the tag. If they're on brown forage, so either the hay isn't very green, or they're on dormant range, or they're on stalks, then we actually want to go for 75 to 100,000 international units. So either 300,000 international units per pound in the mineral, up to 400,000 international units per pound. If you're doing pellets, some people might actually fortify a pellet and be feeding pellets if you need some protein supplement for those cows. Then of course, just remember what your total target is. If I was like feeding a pound a day to a cow and I wanted 50,000 international units per day, well, 50,000 international units per pound, that works pretty easy.
In addition to choosing the right mineral supplement, it's important to make sure that all cows have access to it and that it's always available. Making sure you're providing enough supplementation for your cattle during late gestation could help ensure that your calves get off on the right hoof after calving. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
If you'd like some more insights from Mary on this topic, check out her full interview as part of this month's Beef Watch podcast. Find that by simply visiting beef.unl.edu. That's going to wrap up this week's broadcast. Another thank you to all of our guests for their contributions here on Market Journal this week. We look forward to having you with us next time as we celebrate the blue and gold of FFA. But until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.